What's the worst display of incompetence you've ever witnessed? Story 1, I was at a Subway, and the person in front of me asked for a BLT. The employee just stared blankly until the customer said, "Bacon, lettuce, and tomato." The girl then grabbed some bacon and put on the bread, but then just stared blankly again until the customer said, "Lettuce." After putting lettuce on the bread, the customer got a blank stare until saying, "Tomato." To this day, it's the dumbest employee I've ever seen. Story 2, probably Slingshot Tim, a guy I used to work with, who managed to slingshot himself into an office table during a meeting. Tim was the definition of an unnecessary hire. His dad was one of our most important suppliers at the time, so the boss was forced to hire him for a job he basically couldn't do, but also could never really be fired for. It was the moron's sweet spot. During one meeting with Tim, I saw him lean really far back in his chair during a meeting, far enough back that the chair started to creak loudly. So far, so standard, but Tim had done this maneuver without turning the little thing under the chair to give himself a little slack. So he had to push really hard against the base of the table to stay in his casual position. It looked like a surprising amount of effort. Tim was visibly sweating to stay cool. Eventually, Tim couldn't take it anymore and ended up slipping about 2/3 of the way into the meeting. Thanks to physics, the lack of tension shot his chair forward, throwing him into the conference table. He took the entire desk to the chest, shaking the projector enough to unplug it from the wall and spilling more than a few cups of coffee. It was the most hilariously loud and stupid thing I've ever seen in a meeting. Even people walking by the conference room completely stopped to witness this grown man turn himself into a human catapult. He picked himself up off the floor in a daze, then started hurriedly packing up his stuff amidst uproarious laughter and ran out of the room. I'm not sure if Tim still works there, but I'm definitely sure the legend of Slingshot Tim endures to this day. Edit, thanks for the gold, the laughs, and slingshot 'em. You guys are the best. Story 3, there was a woman who survived a car crash, but was left for days in the car with her dead family. Because the police didn't come to check it out, she died in the hospital. Story 4, a group of students at my workplace who did not realize, until they were taking a formal English exam, that their teacher had been teaching them the wrong book for 6 months. Story 5, I was assistant to a VP at a bank. One of my duties was to make him look good each Monday morning for the meeting. I would print out his homework from the past week and keep it all tidy so he could just rattle it off. One Monday, he literally said, "Don't say this part from my notes." Wow, dude, I counted and made it too much easier. Story 6, I was doing contract work in Miami for a drug company, making a product containing nitroglycerin. They had a chemist, PhD, who I thought did some odd things, but one fine day, we had a meeting across town with him in it. It was a planned meeting. The subject material was known to all days before it. During this meeting, the good doctor gets up to make some point. This prompted him to start drawing a stick figure of nitroglycerin on a whiteboard. He drew 3 carbons. So far, so good. And then another, and finally a 5th. I looked at my boss, an RD engineer, physicist by degree, and he saw it too. Nitroglycerin doesn't have 5 carbon atoms in it. It has 3. While this might be a little nitpicky, this guy was the chemist for this plant with PhD, and nitroglycerin delivery was the entire point of the product. I checked everything I saw from him after that, lest it become my mistake. Story 7, we have this chemical we have to inject in our process to make sure solids don't come out of the liquid. We have been warning this particular customer for months that the level of this chemical was low and dropping, and they better add some stat. Instead, they decide to use the Kramer approach and push it to the last drop. Now they have solids in all their tanks and pumps, causing them to have to shut down and clean out every piece of equipment manually, and losing production for about a week. That's a couple of $1 million down the drain. Good jobs, guys. Story 8, I was getting my driver's license renewed in Chicago. I needed to get a vision check. I put my eyes up to the machine. The clerk said, "Please read the couldn't hear what number she said line." I asked, "Could you repeat that?" Her response stamped my paperwork and said, "Go pay the clerk." Story 9, we have a coolant circuit that uses distilled water. Occasionally the tank is a little low and needs to be topped off. We tell a guy to refill it. Later we come back and we see empty oil jugs next to the tank. No, he didn't. There's no way. Sure enough, there's now a ton of oil in our water system. Fantastic were my exact words, I think. Story 10, well, a few years ago, I switched back to cable from AT&T YouVerse, and the contractor Bright House sent to our house did this. Landlord wasn't happy, called BH. They didn't really have much to say, posted that pic to their Facebook. Supervisor was at our house the next day baffled as to why he would have done that and patched the hole. Story 11, we in Australia recently had a national census. Government spent millions setting up a website encouraging people to use it, only it couldn't handle more than 1 million queries an hour, and so crashed just after dinner time. Roughly 7 p.m., when not surprisingly more than 1 million people just happened to log in on census night. They're now running ads to assure people they are competent enough to store all the private data gathered. Story 12, oh, there's a lot, but one of them sticks out for my job. I work with a lot of files and storing them. This one lady didn't quite get how that was done, so she put a bunch of files in a box and then wrote down the identifying number for each of those files on a piece of paper. So then I get to the office and am handed a stack of 20 boxes and a stack of 20 sheets of paper with no way of telling which box corresponded to which piece of paper. We store thousands of boxes of files. No amount of explaining could get this woman to understand that we don't go dig through every one of those boxes every time someone needs a file back. Story 13, I work in construction. Incompetence is a daily occurrence. In no particular order, one crane operator overcompensated and slammed the 35-ton air handler he was placing on the roof into the wall of the hospital. Two medical gas certification company didn't check all the outlets on a line, just the last one. Well, he screwed up and read the gauges wrong, passed the system, and it went into operation. 2 weeks later, a patient is brought into the ER and requires oxygen, so they hook him up to the oxygen wall outlet. Only problem is that during construction, some got the lines crossed, and the oxygen outlet was actually connected to the vacuum line. Patient was fine. After some well-deserved freaking out, 3 all shaft walls are 2 hours rated, UL listed enclosures for fire safety, and this is strictly enforced and doubly so in hospitals. Well, some hospital maintenance guy decided that the exhaust fan the hospital was putting in on the slide needed to have a ductwork go up this shaft. So he punched a 4x4 hole in it and ran some ductwork through it. Never sealed the hole, no fire smoke dampers, no nothing. We found it during demo when we renovated the area. For during inspection, there's a problem with the way the sprinkler heads were installed. Nothing major, just needed to tighten some uplift restraints. Well, you need to be licensed to work on that stuff, so the idiot plumber decides, hey, I got a wrench and can tighten. So he climbs on the ladder and starts on town in front of the inspector. Came very close to failing the inspection. Everyone is complaining that there is no hot water to half the hospital and starts blaming my design. Okay, let me look. Well, idiot plumber put all of the check valve in backwards, so no hot water was allowed out of the system. 6 on a fire smoke damper propped open with a 2x4. 7 previous contractor did not reconnect the storm pipes under the slab before repouring the concrete. Every time it rained, water would bubble up through the floor tiles and flood the EKG lab. Hospital didn't investigate until patient slipped. They had just been sending a dude with a mop to clean the floor. There's so many more. Edit remembered some really good ones. 8, an electrical ground wire zip tied to a 1 oxygen line. 9, 2 main hospital oxygen line installed above the main kitchen hood. 10, maintenance removed all the supply diffuser from the main hallway that had a west-facing wall, a 60-foot long wall of glass and no shade, because they didn't see the need for it during the last renovation. Well, then don't complain to me when the insulation on the chilled water piping is soaked like a sponge and you have a nice brown line on your ceiling tiles showing the pipe path, and the room is hotter than Satan's armpit. Story 14, I was at a restaurant. The young waiter was clearing dishes. He dropped all the dishes right by the table, like he didn't even make a few feet. Starts stacking them up again, is super embarrassed, and then he drops them again. His superior comes over and sends it back into the kitchen and clears all the dishes. Story 15, there was a guy who was famous among electricians for his stupidity. The best by far was when a foreman asked him to clean out that trailer and burn everything. He cleaned it out, then burned down the trailer. Story 16, I hired and so ID have a date for my cousin's wedding. She claimed she was well-read and promised sophisticated conversation in her ad. In reality, first, we bumped into the maid of honor's family. They had just seen Jurassic World, and their son was reeling off dinosaur facts as little boys are wont to do. Apparently, the kid was not making enough eye contact for my date satisfaction. So she asked, oh, is your son autistic? No. Did you get him vaccinated? Yes. You know, thimerosal really taxes a kid's system. You should get him checked out for the autism. I quickly changed the topic and asked the maid of honor if she was ready for her LSAT yet. My date chimed in, what are you, 30? Why didn't you take it in high school? Did you get knocked up or something? I joked, well, law school isn't like the NHL. You can't skip college and head directly to the pros. Ends up I thought the L meant it was the late SAT, like a dropout getting their GED. We had to explain to her it meant the law school admission test. During the reception, she enjoyed the open bar a little too much and started running her mouth when the best man's toast went long. Toasts. They always give out toasts. I can't believe it. Greatest fascist dictator Adolf Hitler. At least he made the trains run on time. My dad had enough of her shenanigans by that point. That was Mussolini. What? Mussolini made the trains run on time. I don't have time to fight with you people. I got another date in an hour. She stormed out of the reception, and I had to laugh off the another date line as I was trying out an open relationship. Story 17, I'm not sure where to start, but it was definitely by my dad. Let's see, my mom was away taking care of her sick mother for a month, and my dad occasionally had to make his own lunch before leaving for work. He'd make a sandwich, but he didn't even bother to put it in a Ziploc bag or a Tupperware container. He just put it in a grocery bag. I don't know why, but this seems particularly awful. He has given away his credit card number to people who emailed him pretending to be from an internet provider he's never used. He says that he can't take basic safety precautions while driving, such as refraining from tailgating or speeding, because I can't predict the future. Audacious, he says that budgets only apply to businesses, but doesn't have one for his business because he doesn't keep his business and personal accounts separate. They're the same account. Then refuses to follow a budget because budgets are mean. He's got a bachelor's degree in finance. My mom had her laptop on airplane mode to save battery, so when he was using it to check his email or something, she told him how to turn it off. When he got off it, he said, I tried to put back in airplane mode, but I couldn't find the airplane. There's probably worse stuff, but this is what comes to mind. I'll ask my siblings for examples at some point. Edit O. I figured out the most incompetent thing. It was him driving on the wrong side of the road for a few seconds on a busy street. He blamed confusing signage, but the big hint is when you're driving on the left side of a two-way street. Story 18, went to a bagel place on a mildly busy Sunday morning, ordered a bagel. Cashier looked at me wide-eyed, said nothing. Went to her manager. Manager comes over, tells me it will be a good 40-minute wait. Story 19, watch someone try to swipe a library card to try and get into a university building instead of his uni card for about 5 minutes. He looked quizzically at the card and everything. And yes, the two cards are completely different. The shock was so strong it took me a while before I corrected him. Edit, since so many people keep commenting about how the card systems work at their job university, I thought I'd clarify mine a little bit. My university is split up into colleges, and I actually meant that he was trying to get into my college's building. Each college has their own ID card that can't get you into other colleges. But in your own college, it lets you into buildings, residence hallways, buys food, and checks out books in the college or university library. This man was using a card from a public library that isn't in any way affiliated with the university. Story 20, we get called by a school concerned about EM pollution caused by their Wi-Fi and tablets. My colleague suggested to the principal to shut down the Wi-Fi and just connect the tablets with Ethernet cables. While I was there speechless, principal replied, hey, good idea. Story 21, I was working with an older transportation engineer at work. The guy had literally designed hundreds of miles of highways, interchanges, and roadways. He was helping to write a 100-page document that I was an editor on. He took the document without speaking to any other member of the team and sent it out to 20 different people for their input without track changes on it. He said he thought that if he didn't change the name of the document, that it would just automatically update on our server when they made changes too. In the end, I ended up with more than 25 versions of it that I was checking line by line for changes at all hours of the night because it was due in several days and some of the changes conflicted. I explained the whole issue to him once I was finished fixing it all, but he did it again on another, smaller document a month later. Then he retired suddenly. I think that they asked him to leave because his skills stopped developing in the 1970s and because he stole food from work all the time. Even though he was rich, don't miss him one bit. Story 22, I work as a 911 ambulance dispatcher. This chick got a promotion she didn't deserve, and she was primary dispatcher one day, had a unit going to standby when they came up closer for a cardiac arrest, as in, someone is deadying. They need help immediately. The unit going to the standby, with no patients, was about 7 minutes closer than the unit she assigned. I let her know. She acknowledged me, and promptly left things the way they were. I wonder if the cardiac arrest would have had a better outcome if she hadn't been so incompetent and switched the units. My supervisor told me to deal with it because she was promoted over me. Story 23, another one. I was working a gas station and had to hit the emergency stop on a pump because I let his 4-year-old try to pump gas and he got in his face, in his eyes, and the father comes running in and I direct him to the eye wash, and the whole time he is screaming at me because his kid got gas in his eyes. Had to call fire rescue to come, and the guy continues to blame and scream at everyone who's trying to help, saying how he's going to sue the station and blah, blah, blah. I just felt so bad for this kid. TLDR lets his toddler pump gas and then screams at everyone when the kid gets gas in his eyes. Story 24, I work at a golf course. Manager asked the old incompetent guy, whose wife begged manager to give him a job, so head get out of the house to clean the yardage markers middle of the fairway at 250-200-150-100. He was doing stuff before that. So around 11:30 when the course is packed, he drives out and sits down in the middle of the fairways so he can use a wet wipe to wipe off these markers. A couple of us were all finishing up on the same hole. So we were talking, what is he doing? We finally drove over, waved the players off. I didn't realize there were people playing. 11:30 at a golf course. When exactly did you think people played golf? Then he does the same thing. goes out to trim tree branches on trees more or less in the middle of the fairway. This is a 65-year-old man. I'm 25. I had to drive out there and tell him, Joe, you cannot be standing here trimming while people are aimed straight at you. Story 25. Our server room at my last job began leaking water from the ceiling. Not a good thing. It happened during second shift, so the only person there to respond to the alarm was the guy we purposely put on second shift, so he couldn't screw up the busier day shift. Coming the next morning to find a bucket on the floor and a note on the door that he fixed the leak, didn't report it, didn't get the maintenance team in, just threw a bucket under it and called it a day. Needless to say, one leak ended up becoming several overnight. Story 26 on. This would be me. There's this 2-story building at the university I attend with math tutoring lab on the second floor. As a freshman, I would constantly go to this lab because it was taking college algebra. I would be there early when they opened at 8 a.m. until I finished all of my studying and work. One morning, I got to the building and into the elevator. I pushed the button and wait to be taken upstairs. I felt that it was taking a little long, but the university elevators usually took long to take off, plus it was the morning, so I didn't really care. Finally, the doors open, and there's this woman who looks surprised that I'm in there. She's just giving me this weird look, so I kind of just walk out and go toward the lab. However, the lab isn't there. Nothing is there that is supposed to be. In fact, the whole place was renovated. I'm dumbfounded. How could they renovate this much in less than 24 hours? I'm freaking out because I can find the lab or anything else I need for that matter. I walk toward the doors and slam them open. But to my amazement, this is where I walked in. In other words, I'm still on the first floor. When I got in the elevator, I never pushed the button to go up to the second floor. I just pressed the closed door button, so I spent some time in the elevator. And then once I thought I was on the second floor, I spent some time looking for the lab. I felt like an idiot. I ended up finally making my way to the lab. And seeing the girl that gave me that weird look there, Jesus, I still cringe. Story 27. Some lady I used to work with totaled the company vehicle in the parking lot. I wasn't in that day, but I saw photos of the aftermath. She was trying to back the news van out of the garage, realized she forgot something and got out. Leaving the van in gear, thing rolls downhill and gets wedged perpendicular between 2 parked cars. Both the cop and tow truck driver both said how they did that happen. All 3 vehicles were write-offs. This was the second time she had damaged a company vehicle. Earlier that year, she was backing out the mobile production van. It's one of those high-top cargo vans with an AC unit on the roof. She didn't roll the garage door up high enough. Off comes the AC. The door was also badly damaged. Bottom panel had to be replaced, which isn't cheap on those industrial doors. I thought for sure she'd get fired after the parking lot incident. The company is self-insured, so that must have cost a pretty penny. But no, she was still there up until recently and left of her own accord. She wasn't allowed to drive the vans anymore, though. Story 28. I worked at AW when I was in HS. One day, my manager decided to go clean the bathroom. He comes back about 5 minutes later complaining of a headache and that the fumes must be getting to him. I asked him what cleaner he used, and he said, oh, I mixed some of the blue with some of the orange. He mixed cleaner that had ammonia in it with bleach. The fumes were getting really bad in the store, so I told him to dump it and that we needed to get the doors open. I had one of my coworkers run home to get some fans, and we got the store aired out. I was 17 at the time, and my manager was 25. What if TLDR boss mixed ammonia and bleach to clean a bathroom? Near killed himself. Assisted living home kitchen. Worked there in college. They hired high school people as their first job and paid them minimum wage. One kid instructed to make toss salads, didn't know specifically what the toss part meant. Chef says you get all your ingredients in a big bowl, and you toss it in the air to aerate the salad. The kid does just that. The chef, bewildered that the kid believed him, called him out so hard in front of everyone who all laughed a lot for days, months even. In fact, this was years ago, and I still tell the story. Another time we caught him staring at the schedule, for some reason looking confused, since it was just a basic Excel spreadsheet, very simply to read, and he comes up with what month is June. Knew how to answer that question. There are so many more about this kid. Story 29. This story doesn't end with someone almost dying or anything, but it was the moment where I realized just how incompetent the company's middle management was. I work for a luxury retail company. My manager had been having issues getting into the hiring system to post job openings and push through resumes. He hadn't had access to it since he was hired for whatever reason. He had been trying to sort it out for months because school was starting up again, and he knew he needed more staff. He had been in exchange with the person in charge of hiring, and he kept explaining he didn't have access to the system. All the person had to do was email him a link to reset the password, and he was golden. He gets an email saying that she will put on her list of things to do today. She sent him an email saying she would send him an email with the link when she could have sent him the link immediately. We still don't have access to the hiring system, and it's been a month. Story 30. In the early 90s, I worked at a small mom and pop ad agency. There were less than 10 employees. I was a graphic designer and spent most of my days behind a 21 CRT, creating illustrations of food for several weekly newspaper inserts. The company had been doing weekly inserts like this for over 20 years, for years digitally, and had a pretty good library of artwork stored on the server. But as product packaging changed or new products were released, it was our responsibility to create it. For this task, we had a monthly stipend from the advertiser to purchase items as required so that we could photograph them, get them into our system, and photo illustrate them. Now, let me introduce a man named Floyd. Floyd was an elderly gentleman, if I had to guess. He was 70 if he was a day. He was our driver. As an ad agency, often you're running film and stats and other printing press type things across town. Last minute to make deadlines, it makes sense to have a driver. Floyd was good at being a driver. We gave him an address and he went there and he dropped off what he had. Not much thought goes on. However, one late Wednesday afternoon, we're on deadline grocery inserts going to Thursday morning papers, and I learned very late that we're missing the new bag art for the 10 pounds bag of Alpo dog food that's on sale tomorrow. As far as my job goes, this is about as panicked as I can get aside from computer meltdown. There was not much else that could go wrong in my position. I didn't have time to run to the store, which I usually did. Had I planned well, everyone else was elbows and on their computers trying to hit deadline. The only available body was Floyd, sitting in the corner, legs crossed, reading the newspaper. Hey, Floyd, I need you to do me a huge favor, sure. Take this credit card and run to Redacted store. I need a 10 pounds bag of Alpo. Hurry back quickly. I have to get this done before 630 when you drive over the film. Roger that. And off he goes for 45 minutes. Never mind that it's a 5-minute drive to the store. Should have taken 20 minutes max. No, cell phone's not reasonably priced anyway, and definitely not ubiquitous, so I wait, and finally Floyd walks in with a 10-pound bag of store-brand dog food. Floyd, hey, race your dog food. Where's the Alpo? Oh, this was cheaper. I saved like 3. Floyd, we don't have a dog. Snatches the card from his hand and run out the door to get the Alpo myself. To this day, I still can't remember if I made it back on time, if I made the 630 delivery, but the legend of Floyd will live on in my mind forever. Story 31 was teaching a new hire at a pizza place how to run the dishwasher. 1. Unload clean dishes. 2. Insert new dishes. 3. Put 2 tablespoons of XYZ cleaner into the washer. 4. Hit start button. 5. Wait 5 minutes. Then repeat. I came back to see that he loaded all the cups face up, so they collected all the dirty dishwater and he had to manually empty them all and start the load over again. The waitresses who were short on cups were not happy. Story 32 ever been to the Veterans Administration? Cruise on down there anytime you want. You'll see gross incompetence on a breathtaking level. Doesn't matter which day you pick, they're dedicated to incompetence and practice it daily. If you don't have a VA clinic near you, go to the airport and watch the TSA. They have people whose qualifications to provide security are the ability to read the back of the pizza box and a waist size exceeding 40 inches. Those probably are related. I can't really decide which is more incompetent. Story 33, this will probably get buried, but I used to work at a small private airport. We had one FBO that I worked for and a smaller flying club next door, basically some old guys who would sit around and talk and work on their planes. However, they did have an actual flight instructor who was notoriously called Downwind Bob because he attempted a downwind landing and completely botched it. One day when I was working, I hear a small twin-engine Piper Aztec or Navajo plane call in on the local radio no tower. They just announced their intentions to other pilots that he is coming in for a landing runway 31. I grab some chalks and head out on the ramp to direct him to a parking spot. As I'm waiting out there, I see Bob load up into his little plane and arrow and Kachamp and begin taxiing down to the opposite end of the runway, which would be 13. I again hear the Aztec call in for final approach, while at the same time Bob taxis onto the runway and begins to take off. I realize that he must not have a radio as they're not required at this airport, which is stupid, so I try waving him down, but he doesn't see me. My next thought was just, oh, these people are going to die and I'm going to be on the news. As soon as Bob gets airborne, he sees the Aztec and veers to the right. They weren't really that close, and the Aztec landed fine. But as soon as the pilot gets out, he asks who the was that just took off, to which I had to explain was technically a CFI who worked next door. My boss gave him a very strongly worded phone call when he came back. TLDR certified flight instructor plays chicken on the runway. Also sorry if format is weird, this is on mobile. Story 34 the time I was in the hospital after childbirth and got a migraine. I take a prescription medication for migraine as I am allergic to OTC, painkillers, Tylenol, and NSAIDs. So I'm asking for a dose of my usual prescribed migraine abortive, and the doc says she's just going to give me Tylenol 3. I remind her I can't take it. See this big red allergy band on my wrist. She asks what my reaction is, hives and facial swelling. She turned to the nurse and told her to give me the Tylenol and some Benadryl. I told the nurse there was no way I was taking the Tylenol. Finally, they agreed to give me my migraine medicine. Then the nurse couldn't figure out the auto-injector, so I just did it myself. Also, upon discharge, what do you think they have me as a painkiller? Percocet, of course, which contains Tylenol. So it took me another couple of hours to get that straightened out and get a painkiller prescribed that wouldn't land me in anaphylaxis. And it should be no surprise that this was at a military hospital. Story 35, get their cheating S name tattooed on them. She thought it would be the ultimate proof of how much she loved him. She figured if she did that, he'd stay with her and be faithful. Story 36, former boss pulled the plug out of the back of a server after I told him I'd attached it to a UPS to keep it from going down in the event of a power outage. Story 37, not knowing what AM2 is. I have this uncle that studied industrial design. I don't know what scummy tech school he studied in, nor I know how he even graduated high school. But one day, on his first job, I think about 3 months after being contracted, designing bathtubs and sinks, so I heard a call from my uncle, not my dad's brother, but BIL asking my dad, who is an engineer, what square meters were and how to measure them. I was a freshman in high school at that point. I was dumbfounded when I heard it. He is a grown man. He does not know basic concepts about his own work. How did he graduate? I asked in the background. My dad is trying very hard not to burst laughing in tears and very calmly explains it to my uncle. To this day, I can't look at my uncle as something else than an irresponsible. But hey, at least when he up, the result it's going to be a shitty sink. Can't imagine what would have happened had he decided to study medicine. Story 38, my co-worker, Joe, not real name, came in one Monday morning and told me that he lost his eyesight for about half an hour over the weekend because he was looking at the moon through a telescope without filters. Joe came in another day with a cast on his leg and told me about how he fell in a hole that had rebar in it on site at a project because there was a newspaper covering the hole and he stomped on the newspaper. He let a worker cut a pipe with a saw while holding the pipe in one hand, and he cut off a finger. Who is Joe? What does he do at our company? Oh yeah, Joe is our OSHA competent person on the field. I know he has done something dangerous stupid lately, and as soon as I find out what it is, I will post an edit about it. I just remembered. He bought some injections from Mexico that he was going to shoot into various spots on his belly to burn off stubborn belly fat. I did a quick Google search of the injections he was about to use and found the following side effects: facial swelling, difficulty breathing, rashes, hives, and liver failure. When I showed Joe the side effects, he exclaimed, "Oh man, I had no idea." So this dude had bought some questionable injections from Mexico and didn't even bother to find out anything about them before using them. He's like a real-life Homer Simpson. Story 39, I worked in an assisted living facility. There were outlets that had red covers. They were red because it signified that the outlet was hooked up to the generator. This was for the many patients who were hooked up to machines that they needed to continue living. So if the power went out, they would not die. Place gets repainted, so all the outlet covers are removed. See where this is headed. No one pays any attention to the color coding, and the red covers get put all over just willy-nilly. Wasn't until many months later when a huge storm took the power out for days that anyone realized this grave mistake. Fortunately, no lives were lost. Story 41, time I was out getting gas. I live in a wealthier part of town, and in the middle of pumping gas, some 20-ish-year-old girl came up to me and asked if I could start the machine for her. She ended up admitting to me that she had no idea how to put gas in her car, and that somebody else usually just does it for her. We were about 15 minutes away from the automobile capital of the world. Story 41, somebody used to work with didn't drink tea. The boss once asked him to make him some tea. This guy's always assumed it's instant tea, like coffee, and that the tea bag is just a measure quantity. He proceeds to split the tea bag, mix it all in. He even put the milk in first and deliver it to the boss. Maybe it was just quick thinking. He never had to make the tea again. Story 42, I had a tech bring down a computer that was monitoring a medication drip for a surgery patient when I worked for a hospital IT department. They had to close up the patient and move him to a different operating tray. Because of this, his reasoning was that since he couldn't find where the computer was located to roll out an OS update, he would take it down and wait for someone to call in a ticket. Story 43, the blowhard consultant the home office had sent us with some good news, some bad. In his pep talk about the good news, he kept trotting out his deep understanding of business by using words like synergies and core competencies. It was unbelievable bullshit babble. People were rolling their eyes. Even the boss couldn't hide his disgust. Then the consultant got to the bad news: some jobs would be lost through nutrition. The boss asked him if he meant attrition. Nope, nutrition. What, you're gonna starve us? Howls of laughter, everyone looking around like WTF. That was it. The boss ended the meeting right there, visibly furious. I never saw he consultant again.